I don't know how you feel about it, and I'd be interested in getting your perspective, but I do feel like we've come quite some way in the last year. Certainly when we were together 12 months ago, I think there was considerable speculation about the Commonwealth's commitment to housing and a concern, I think as Scott might have picked up, about where reform of the Federation was going and whether or not that signalled a Commonwealth withdrawal from housing policy. My view is that the developments over the last several months do demonstrate that the Commonwealth places a significant priority on housing policy. At last year's National Housing Conference, and I seem to recall seeing a number of you there, my Minister, the Minister for Social Services, flagged that the Commonwealth does see housing as fundamentally important to ensuring the welfare of all Australians. And he also went on to note that housing stability substantially impacts the social outcomes of individuals, their economic independence, and their ability to participate in the community. Very important words, particularly from the Minister for Social Services and for the current government, whose strong view is about supporting people to participate economically and socially. But perhaps even more importantly, Minister Porter also went on to acknowledge that no single level of government can alone work to increase the supply of social housing and affordable housing, and that collaboration and innovation is going to be needed in order to address the challenges in Australia in housing. So since the conference, I think there have been a number of encouraging developments. In December, the Council of Australian Governments acknowledged the importance of social and affordable housing for Australians on low incomes and charged both levels of government with continuing the reform of housing and homelessness services, and required that we report back at the end of this year on progress. The Council on Federal Financial Relations, so this is the forum of all Commonwealth, State and Territory Treasurers, established the Affordable Housing Working Group, yes Tony, it is a working group, to look at options to significantly increase the supply of social and affordable housing. The Commonwealth Government's Clean Energy Finance Corporation quietly announced the establishment of a $250 million community housing program to support investment in the development of social and affordable housing. And then finally, probably also flying a little bit under the radar, but I also think it's still quite significant, the Commonwealth attended the State Housing Ministers meeting that was held in Brisbane at the end of March, where we did talk about national collaboration around housing and homelessness policy issues. So collectively, at least for us at the Commonwealth level, there has been a lot of activity. And as you might be able to sort of pick up, I think cause for optimism. Of course, and this is, I do agree with what Tony was saying before, it's important that that activity ultimately translates into some action. But can I put it to you that we all have a role to play in translating that activity into action? And while there has been a lot happening, it is important to acknowledge there is a lot to do. Again, over the last 12 months, we've seen an increase in the number of Australians accessing special homelessness services. We're seeing more households experiencing rental stress, and we're continuing to see the great Australian dream of home ownership decline, particularly for younger cohorts. And that's all happened despite significant levels of government expenditure from all levels of government. This is not just about Commonwealth. State governments are putting a lot of money into housing and homelessness as well. Collectively between us more than $10 billion a year. And I'm sure that you have all heard about the current tight fiscal environment, which is actually the case. So it is certainly true that the growing collective spend that we're putting into housing and homelessness is not going to be sustainable. So what we do need to have a look at is how we get better outcomes for that significant investment. COAG's decision to essentially remove housing and homelessness from the reform of the Federation process, I think, was significant. And perhaps probably the most significant decision that we've had in the last 12 months. In my view, that recognises that we, all levels of government, have an important role to play in solving the housing and homelessness challenge. By requiring the work to be taken forward by ministers in the context of our existing reform mechanisms, COAG has given us the opportunity to focus on collaboration and innovation and the search for solutions, rather than looking at different ways to carve up responsibilities between different levels of government. We have been asked to report back on progress by the end of 2016. In public policy terms, that is a bloody quick time frame. But it's appropriate that we move on and take action, and it does give us some opportunity to do further policy development work. We are expecting that both Minister Porter and the Treasurer will lead the report back to COAG, together with their counterparts in states and territories. And I think that's quite significant that both ministers will be leading that work, because that, one, underscores the importance of the housing policy area. Two, it recognises that housing has both social and economic infrastructure aspects. And three, in getting change done, particularly at the Commonwealth level, but also at states, it's always better to have the Treasurer on side and in the tent rather than outside. A critical element of the work that we will be doing to inform the report back to COAG will be actually undertaken through the working group, so the Affordable Housing Working Group. And I do want to emphasise, if you haven't seen it, the terms of reference for the working group gives us twin goals. One, around maintaining a strong social housing safety net for the most vulnerable in society. But also, two, looking to facilitate large-scale investment in affordable housing, particularly in affordable rentals. So government was very clear that it was targeting the lower end of the housing continuum, and it wants to achieve large-scale investment. And to achieve that, the working group, in which I am one member, we have been charged with looking at some of the well-trodden models that I think everybody agrees can work, and it is actually about settling the implementation details. So this is not about sort of further work on identifying the models, it's actually about a detailed discussion about what we need to do to make them work. We have gone out for public submissions and public consultations. Nearly 80 submissions came in. We've also held a couple of roundtables with industry, community, academic and financial sector stakeholders. I am aware that a number of you in the room, including PowerHousing, put in a submission, and can I thank you for taking part in the process. At this stage, the feedback we've gotten and the discussions we've had does indicate particular support for the concept of a housing bond aggregator. And that is certainly where we are having a close look. Obviously that sort of model is tried and tested overseas, and for investors, it's a known asset class. But of course, the working group is continuing to deliberate and look at the other options that we have on the table. Our final report is due to be handed to heads of treasuries by the 30th of June this year. The outcomes of that report and the agreed actions coming from it will feed into the report back to COAG in 2016, at the end of 2016. A second important element of the policy work for COAG was put in place a couple of weeks ago at the Housing Ministers meeting, and that was dealing with future directions in homelessness policy. So Housing Ministers had a long discussion about future directions in homelessness policy, and that was particularly driven by recognition that the current National Partnership Agreement on Homelessness runs until the 30th of June 2017. And again, in the grand scheme of government decision making and public policy development, not very far away at all. So coming out of the meeting, they have charged senior officials with doing a report to them on future directions in homelessness policy and future direction in funding, including consideration of longer term funding arrangements. That report will be evidence-based and draw on the current evidence of the effectiveness of existing homelessness policies and programs, and then we'll consider, based on that evidence, future directions for funding. We've been charged with reporting back to Housing Ministers by the 30th of September, and they will consider that report at the next meeting of Housing Ministers, which are scheduled for late October or early November. That work will then also fold into the report back to COAG. So the concurrent work that we're doing on social and affordable housing as well as homelessness, we think will form the basis for a comprehensive report back to COAG. But even more importantly, we think doing the work concurrently also gives us an opportunity to look at the linkages between homelessness, social housing and affordable housing, and an opportunity to look at how we can strengthen the pathways from homelessness to housing. In addition to those, what I call multi-jurisdictional mechanisms, the Commonwealth is going to also consider to look at its housing policy agenda. And just to finish off, and I don't know how I'm running for time here, Tony, am I right? There's a few principles that we will guide the Commonwealth's approach to thinking about its housing policy agenda. None of it rocket science, but I think important for people to understand because it will help shape how you engage with us. First and foremost, we think that housing policy needs to look at how we can achieve greater stability in housing supply. Sorry, it's a statement of the obvious, I get that. It's just something that nobody's been able to crack for many decades. But at the end of the day, what's going to solve our affordability challenges, what is going to help get people into housing, it is more responsive supply, delivering the diversity of housing supply that different cohorts need. We particularly want to focus on how we fix the market failure in the affordable end of the spectrum, and we also want to look at how we can get away from the peaks and troughs of housing supply over time. Second, we want to look at how we improve sustainability. Now, there's a few elements to this principle. Firstly, it is very important to us that we look at the sustainability of our builds. From our perspective, the issues around social and affordable housing manifest through a number of different sectors. Most importantly, we want to be looking at how we deliver social and affordable housing for all cohorts: older people, people with a disability, young families, our Indigenous population. So when we are talking about the sustainability of the build, we are looking at how we deliver choice and dwellings that are suitable for all our sort of vulnerable cohorts. The other non-surprising aspect of sustainability is the fiscal sustainability for taxpayers. This is why the current work around the Affordable Housing Working Group and the innovative financing mechanisms, and in particular the focus on trying to bring more private institutional investment into the sectors, is so important to us. The Commonwealth recognises that we have a role to play in this, and we are looking quite closely at the sort of platform that the Commonwealth needs to help build to encourage investment, along with actions from the states and territories. In particular, what are the sorts of elements that we need to come to the table with to improve the attractiveness of investment for private and institutional investors. We're in particular looking at a couple of areas. Firstly, we're willing to consider reforms to the Commonwealth Rent Assistance program to help improve potential returns, but we also acknowledge that that's going to have to be done in a very careful and considered way. Secondly, you will have seen some media in recent weeks about consideration for an automatic rent deduction scheme. This is something that has been championed by the states and territories, and it is something that the Commonwealth thinks is absolutely worth considering. We think that it's important both from a helping to protect tenancies and reduce the risk of people falling out of housing and into homelessness, but we also see it has a role to play in securing the income stream that investors will be interested in to encourage them to put capital into the sector. Finally, as we get these other settings right, we do want to aim for improved housing choices. Again, a couple of different aspects to this from our perspective. One, it's about delivering choice to Australians for their housing options. That might be the choice between renting and buying, the type of dwelling, and the location. I think think most importantly for us in social services, though, it's also about supporting people to have the choice to move beyond social housing and into private rental and even into home ownership where that's appropriate. And this is really about working to support people to improve their capacity, capability and participation so that they have a meaningful choice about moving up the housing continuum. And when they get there, there are safeguards to help them stop them falling back. So this is something we'll be having a particularly close look at over coming months, and we will be leveraging off the actuarial valuation that we are currently doing of the Commonwealth Social Security liability. This is our investment approach. There are a number of housing variables being included in the actuarial evaluation, and we will be looking at how we can use those to better target interventions. I do appreciate that a lot of what I've just said is somewhat aspirational and absolutely long term, but we think it's worth doing. So that is where we will be putting our energies, over coming months and years, and we will be looking forward to working with you in these areas, because we absolutely recognise that you have a fundamental role to play in all these aspects. Thanks very much.